Okay. We're having a little technical difficulty. I don't see on the screen either Barbara Maxwell or Kristen Holt's photo. I just see myself, and I'm not really sure why it's doing that. So hold on, please.
Are you in that little side-by-side speaker view?
Yeah, there we go.
Yep.
I think was associated to speaking, which is just odd.
Quiet.
Well, I think we'll be fine as long as whenever you speak, it will come up with you.
Well, I can go ahead and get started. It's 12:10. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of our inaugural Care Week event. Thank you for joining us. I am Kristen Hull. I'm the Therapy Education Coordinator here at RHI. I'm here to welcome you, share a few housekeeping items, and introduce today's keynote speaker. So as far as housekeeping goes, today's session is recorded and will be available post-conference. We will be sure to send that link out to you in email. You're going to be set for view only, where your name will just appear. And if you can't hear or have any technical difficulties, well, if you can't hear, make sure your computer audio is on first and foremost. But if you have any technical questions or difficulties, you can reach out to Judy Reuter directly. If you have questions during the presentation, please use the chat feature, and then I will make sure that Dr. Maxwell receives these questions. We'll hold most of them till the end, but we'll also interject throughout with any questions that might pop up. There will be a certificate of completion available for this session when you register, or if you have registered. If you did not register or you're doing a group viewing, make sure you put your name in the chat so that you still get that certificate. So I am going to stop share so we can switch PowerPoint presentation. And I am honored to introduce our keynote speaker today. Dr. Maxwell is the Associate Dean and Director of the IU Center for Interprofessional Practice and Education and Professor of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at the IU School of Medicine. Her interest in research and evidence-based practice were enhanced through a master's in research methodology from King's College London and a PhD focused on realist evaluation and program theory from Bournemouth University. As an experienced researcher and educator in these areas, her focus is on translating evidence to practice, considering how clinicians locate, appraise, and apply the best available evidence, and how they tailor care to fit the unique perspectives and values of patients, and how clinical expertise evolves and is applied to patient care. Here at RHI, we are leaders in our community with making change by translating evidence into care so that we are providing the highest quality care to our patients. So as we continue to build upon our practices, let's get some inside secrets from someone who is a leader in evidence translation. Would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Barbara Maxwell?
Thanks so much. I'm really glad to be with you today, and I'm hoping that as we go through this kind of keynote will actually really just give you a lot of feel for conversation. So if I'm successful in what I'm trying to do, you'll start having some conversations in your practice settings about ideas that kind of this session generates. So I'm a rehab in my heart and in my experience. So I'm a rehab PT who's worked in neuro rehab for many years. And so the examples I'm going to give you are some examples that are coming from that rehab perspective. So hopefully they will kind of really resonate with you as we go through. So the topic for today it's titled The Judicious Combination, and it's really about how we can really enhance the quality of clinical care that we deliver by integrating really key aspects in care. The premise of what we're doing today comes from this beautiful quotation that comes from David Sackett, who is really thought of as the father of evidence-based medicine. When he started, he's Canadian, and he started the thoughts about how we might really use, as evidence was taking off in kind of the 1980s, early 90s, he started thinking about the ways in which that could be used in practice. And in one of his, it's kind of a seminal text in evidence-based medicine and evidence-based practice, he talks about evidence-based medicine, but it equally applies to practice, as the judicious combination of the best available research evidence with our clinical expertise and patients' unique perspectives, values, and expectations. And that's kind of what the topic is going to be today. It's going to be based on David Sackett's original thoughts about how we take evidence and translate that to what we do and shape it by what we know from our clinical expertise and what we find from those unique perspectives and values of patients. So I have a question for you, and you can put your answers into chat, and then hopefully we'll be able to get your perspectives on it. So Kristen, if you keep an eye in the chat for me and let me know what people share. So I'm wondering how many of you were trained in evidence-based practice during your initial professional training. As you fill in chat, I can tell you that I was not. It didn't exist then. So when I did my original professional training, neuro-wise, we were transitioning into evidence on neuroplasticity. That was new. We were totally transforming our view of what happens with people post central nervous system injury, from a compensatory model to a motor relearning model. Everything was shaking up and changing. And yet the notion, David Sackett hadn't started his work thinking about evidence and how we translate that to practice, but it was happening in practice. We were seeing this, the models were changing, our knowledge was changing, and we were trying to work it out. But we didn't have the thing called evidence-based practice or evidence-based medicine. It was not taught, it really didn't exist. So I'm interested, how many people, Kristen, in the chat have said that they were trained in it when they started in their professional career?
So far, we have the majority of outpatient therapists were trained, the younger grads. One said it didn't exist for her. Most physical therapy programs have been taught EBP for the past 20 years. Nursing, yes. Med school, yes. And residency. Nursing,
Yep.
yes.
So pretty much in the timeline of once it happened. So I moved in to do a Master's of Research Methodology at King's College London, right at the time that David Sackett was starting his work on evidence-based medicine. And that's where I was lucky enough to start to incorporate a structured kind of way of doing what was happening in practice into my practice. So using that evidence-based medicine approach, but it was absolutely founded on those key three things. So I'm really interested to kind of hear in the chat what your EBP education actually involved. What kind of topics did you cover? What kind of things did you learn? So if you could post those in the chat, because I've taught evidence-based practice for a long time. And it confounds me that as someone who educates others in it, that when it's talked about, a lot of the time, it's talked about as searching the evidence, finding the evidence, ways that we can get the evidence to flow to us. But the notion of clinical expertise and the notion of patients' unique perspectives and values, which was in Sackett's Judicious Combination, seem to have been left out. So that's the reason why this session is titled as it is, because I really think we need to do some pausing and really thinking beyond how to retrieve the volume of evidence that we have and maybe how to critique the evidence that we have and move into how we actually adjust that and tailor to the needs of patients and populations. So Kristen, have we got anything in our chat from folks about what was included in their curriculum?
Yeah, there's research methodology, research utilization, change theory, research methods with comparing and contrasting EBR and EBP, understanding different levels of medicine, evidence-based medicine lecture lasts mostly.
Okay, so pretty much as I've just stated, the thing that confounds me, it's about that one first piece, the evidence, how to retrieve it, how to find it, what the research methods mean, how you critique it, all of those aspects. But remember, it's made of three parts. So that's what we're going to kind of focus on today, is those three parts. So we'll start with the evidence, because that's the piece you're probably most familiar with. When we think about the evidence, it can be, when you take an evidence-based practice course, say during your initial training, it can be quite disheartening sometimes, particularly it varies by profession, but it can be quite disheartening when you find that there's an absence of literature. We had many students going through their entry-level programs that when they find out that they can't find high-level evidence for different things they do in their profession, they actually get quite disillusioned because they think, well, if there's no evidence for it, why am I doing this? Why does this exist? Why does my practice exist? Why does my profession do this? Because there's no evidence there to support it. But it's really an absence of evidence. It's not saying that things do not work. And that's often a thing which people misinterpret. They think if there's no evidence, that means there's no proof that it works. It doesn't work. But we do know that these things work because we wouldn't continue to do them and our patients wouldn't continue to pay for them and experience them. And we can see and mark those outcomes in recovery. The piece that's missing is it hasn't been studied. Or if we think about the levels of evidence, there's different ways to think about the levels of evidence. We usually taught in EBP programs about the standard levels of evidence that come from Archie Cochrane's work. And it's about meta-analyses being at the top, systematic reviews, randomized controlled trials, and it drops down through the levels of evidence. And again, when we're quantitatively focused in our mindset, we think the only best evidence, the evidence we have to have if it exists, has to be at that top tier. But there's many, many things which we do in rehab that are complex endeavors. You cannot perform randomized controlled trial on many of the things that we do because of the complexity of them, because of the setting. The homogeneity is not there in the populations that we're treating. People have lots of comorbidities, lots of other conditions that layer on top. It becomes incredibly difficult to do these types of studies in the type of work that's involved in rehab. In some areas, yes, we could do it. In others, cohort studies are better. So picking the right methods for the job. Sometimes when we're thinking about searching for evidence, yes, if you have that, top level evidence, you have to really question whether it actually relates. And is it the right methodology for the actual thing that you're studying? So the evidence lies where it lies. If there's a lot of cohort studies, it probably means the questions that you're asking need that approach. So there's ways in which there's some beautiful alternate models out there that look at the types of questions you're asking and how those levels of evidence should be represented in hierarchical order. So that sometimes also, makes people feel bad about the evidence that's out there because they think, well, I don't have the top level evidence. There's many reasons why things have not been studied. They have been studied in a particular way. There's different funding streams for research, which means that some professions have lots of money coming into research and others do not. There's many, many reasons why the evidence looks the way it does. And the thing I really want to hit home about when you find the evidence and you're thinking about actually applying it to your patients is that nature of critique. The critique is absolutely vital because you can do a real disservice to your patients when you're not tailoring and you're not critiquing. I'm giving you an example here. So this is an example from article that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1980. And this is it in its entirety. So if you read it, it's all about using narcotics and stating that addiction is rare. It's a letter to the editor. It's maybe 10 lines long. And it says that over almost 12,000 patients who were hospitalized during the administration of opiates, there was really only 2 patients or so that had any issues with addiction, but the medication was delivered in this way, and this is all you know about what they did. This little article, and if you know anything, there's not a person who doesn't know about the opioid epidemic. This little article, this little letter, actually, don't even know, letter to the editor, was cited over 609 times. Now, the average citation for a letter in the New England Journal of Medicine, contemporaneously to this one at the same time, was to have the article cited 11 times. This letter was cited 609 times. And if you see, this is the citation. The dark bar shows you where it was affirmed. So people were using it as evidence that they were affirming the finding that narcotics are non-addictive. The light line on the top is they were saying some other thing about it. And the little mid-blue, kind of mid-bluey gray shade, is when they actually challenged it. So you can see over time, even into 2017, this 1980s article has been used to affirm that opioids or narcotics were non-addictive. You can see a spike in 1995, around about 1995, when OxyContin came on the market. This article then being really heavily used, 10 lines of a letter, heavily used. And this is the type of things that people were saying when they cited it. These are just a few examples taken from the citations. So in reality, medical opioid addiction is very rare. Porter and Jick's study, that 10 lines, that's all the person would have read. On patients treated with narcotics, only 4 of the almost 12,000 cases showed psychological dependency. 439 times of the times that the article were cited, so about 72% of the time, they used that 10 little lines as evidence that opioid addiction was rare in patients who were treated with opioids. And in about 80%, so 491 of the citations of this article, they didn't even state that the patients in this little letter were hospitalized. Caused huge problems, as we know. It was used as one of the primary sources of evidence for substance use and for generating an epidemic of substance use disorder related to OxyContin prescription. And it's been very public about how the pharmaceutical companies played a part in that, but the miscitation and the lack of critique and just taking this little 10, 11 little lines and using that in ways that it should never have been used, really promulgated that problem. And it's one of the articles that really promoted the use of opioids in outpatient settings, in long-term care, and it's tiny. So that importance of critique cannot be overstressed. That doesn't matter if you find it. You have to really be critical about what the findings are. So this is Sackett's from 2011, evidence-based kind of cycle of how you take evidence and you start to think about clinical questions. So it always starts with some clinical question that you have. What's the best way to? Is there a difference between? Why are we doing this here and that there? Does it matter? Does it change the outcomes for patients? What is it about this particular presentation? So they come from you, from clinicians, thinking about what's happening in practice. And then you convert that into some answerable question. Well, we want to know if X is better than Y, or we want to be able to know if there's different outcomes if we work together in this way, or we work together in that way, or if we change a lovely study from many moons ago that I was involved with, was looking at dosage for physical therapy. In stroke rehab, is there a dose to outcome comparison? You'll love this. Overall, the study found no. Again, think critically about the data. Overall, it said no. But we were able to subclassify different patients, and for some, absolutely the dosage made a difference. For some, it did not, and for some, it didn't. It had marginal kind of impact. But for that one subgroup, we could identify the subgroups that really did benefit from a higher dosage of physical therapy. So that's, again, thinking critically about the literature. If our study had been cited as it's just about the dosage doesn't matter, and they hadn't actually read about the subcategories, people would not have changed practice, but they did because they actually bothered to look at the subcategories. The second thing is tracking down the best evidence, ways to do that. And so I would argue that the way to do that as a clinician is to think about your common practice, the things you see every day. So my rehab work, I was working with stroke every day, Parkinson's disease every day, head injury regularly, but not every day, multiple sclerosis regularly, but not every day. Rarely, I would see unusual presentations that were associated with particular not common diseases. So that's the way you need to think about searching for the evidence. Think about the things you see every day. And for those, you have to be up to speed on the current literature. You need to know that. You need to know what the evidence says for those things you see every day. So that's something that over time you should continue to have yourself alerted on. There's tools like PubCrawler. If you've never used PubCrawler, please go and find it. PubCrawler comes from University in Dublin. And it actually, you put in your topics that you're looking for, and it sends you the articles that relate to topic. You don't have to go searching. Whatever is published most recently about that will come directly to you. So pub crawler, for those keeping on top of the latest thing of the things you see every day, is absolutely amazing. Beyond that, for the things that you see occasionally, you might also want to do a pub crawler or an occasional search for those, just to catch yourself up, or do up to date, or use some of the other softwares. Pedro's great for PT, that actually collates the evidence for you and gives you a synopsis. There's lots of tools out there that, as a clinician, mean that you do not have a heavy lift, because other people do that work of critiquing and condensing and for you. And then for those things that are rare, that you haven't seen before, you've only seen infrequently, that's the times when you probably need to go find a librarian or reconnect with your searching skills and go search for some up-to-date information on those particular conditions. So as you enter into care for that person, you're more knowledgeable. There are also the moments where the patient probably knows more about their condition than you do, because the rarer the condition tends to be the more knowledgeable the patient is about it and their family than you as the clinician. So I treated a young boy once with a mitochondrial genetic disorder. His family, he was about 12, 13 years old. His family knew everything about that disorder and were a fantastic source of information. So that's kind of the unique perspectives and values of the person is, when you think rare diseases, the patients are very well informed. So there's different ways that you can get the evidence to actually flow to you and be critiqued by someone else. The third is obviously that critique part, absolutely essential, because we can go really awry, as hopefully the opioid example kind of showcased to you, how easy it is to take literature for more than it's worth, or to misrepresent it. Then you have to integrate the evidence into your clinical decision making, and then hopefully you reevaluate. And you're really good at that, this at Rehab Hospital of Indiana. I know this is at your heart. And when Kristen did her introduction, she highlighted it, how good you are, how much you focus on this. And so this integration, translation to practice, evidence is not really that helpful if it doesn't get integrated into practice. So you're doing that. And then the last step is that evaluation, where you really think about, we go back to your question and see what you find. You need to do a different exploration. Did it turn out the way that you thought? And you kind of keep going through the cycle as you gather that new evidence. So that's kind of the process of it. But we're going to focus on this part next. This judicious combination is about integration. So, like I said, when you put it in the chat, you had evident information and education that's about kind of the left-hand side of this diagram. This integration of evidence into clinical decision-making is the part where the judicious combination comes in. And that's what we're going to focus some time on now. So, what about clinical expertise? How do we develop it? This is something that the reason why entry-level education focuses on the literature is because clinical expertise develops over time as you're exposed to more and more and more and more encounters with patients who present with the same condition, different conditions, they present in different ways, they have different outcomes, and you as a clinician create a data bank. You have your own data bank of everyone you've ever seen, the sessions you've been to like this that have taught you different things. It all gets input into your neural system. So you have a beautiful memory bank that stores all of these cases. When I moved into education and trying to teach people about neuro rehab and the things that I was doing in the clinic and how I interacted and engaged with patients, I find it really, really difficult to articulate to a student the process that happened in my head because I never had to think, I wasn't using, it's called metacognition when you think about your thinking. I'd never thought about what I was doing with the patients in that way to explain it to someone else. I had these patterns in my head. I could preemptively, you see someone and you can predict. Expertise has predictive capacity for experts, where you can kind of predict what's coming next, what the pattern's going to look like. You can predict the things to ask. You can predict as you're working with someone for PT, your hands are on them, you're guiding them as they move. You can kind of feel it's all clicking in the way they move. That, oh, there was some lateral translation there. There was a, they're elevating up here. You're not writing that down. Your brain is just absorbing all of these things, the movement analysis, the touch, the feel. All of this happens as you're encountering with the person, and you don't even recognize it happen. It's innate when you glean your expertise. It's why in entry-level education, how do you get to that? You haven't got the patterns yet. You haven't got the pattern recognition. So expertise develops through pattern recognition, and that takes experience, exposure, and time. But how do you learn to do that? We started some work, a colleague of mine who happens to be an orthopedic PT, her and I started some work with residents, PT residents in an orthopedic residency, where we were thinking about the way that the students were leaving with this, there's an absence of literature, it's not higher level evidence. What does it mean for my profession? How do I actually work in this profession if I'm not seeing that high level systematic reviews about everything I do in orthopedics? How can I know what to apply? What does it mean for the things that I've been taught and trying to work with these with patients? So we were really aware of that situation with, the students, because they'd been focusing on the evidence. And maybe they hadn't been taught to have that thought about absence doesn't mean no effect. It's not the same thing. So we started to kind of think about, well, how can we develop pattern recognition in these residents? So one of the things we started to do was have sessions. And this is a way that you can also do this as a team to actually learn from your clinical expertise as well. We started to pull together the residents. We met with them once a week, and they're all out in practice. They're all practitioners. And we met with them and we would pick a topic for the week. So say the week was total knee replacement, something like that. We're thinking about total knees. We'd ask them that week, okay, this week, you're going to bring a patient, the story of a patient to the clinic, someone that you see this week who's had a total knee. And here's the evidence, here's the guideline or the guideline that kind of helps us kind of put together what should happen in PT rehab of people who have total knee replacements. This is kind of the top evidence that we have. Read this and think about your patient and think about how close they are to the inclusion and exclusion criteria of this study. Would the person you are bringing this week to the discussion be included or excluded? I can tell you that we never found someone who would be included. Always the patients that they brought, no matter what the topic, would have been excluded, and normally because they were too old, too young, or the most common reason is because they had comorbidities that were ruled out in the initial screening process of the studies. So start there when you're thinking about how do you balance your clinical expertise when the patient that appears is not able to be included in the study that you might be using as your foundational evidence. So when you get to that point, what do you do? How do you start to glean? And we were thinking of growing clinical expertise in these students. So number one was help the residents identify how like or unlike the studies the patients they're seeing actually are. The other thing we did with residents, and again, this is a really good activity for any practitioner thinking about, for me as an educator, trying to articulate to students what it is that I was doing when I was treating and how I was making my decisions, trying to give me a format to articulate it to them, and also giving new clinicians an opportunity to grow this expertise. We had the students present on that patient that they brought each week. What did they see? So when you saw them, what did you see? What were the key things about your interaction with them? So I saw a lot of effusion around their knee, or I saw, restriction in this, or I saw a posture that was closed down and restricted. I saw I saw a lot of reaction if I tried to actually, engage with them. Or so what did you actually see? Not just physically in the joint, but what did you see in your interaction with the person? What did you feel? So for those of you from PT, we're at these little digits here are just our best tool set. It is for other professions too. So I'm just talking from a PT spirit. So what did you feel when you actually move the joint, when you actually touch it, when you try to move it? What did you actually feel? Did you feel resistance in the joint? Did you feel resistance from the musculature? Did you feel resistance from the person because you could feel them locked down and they did not want you to touch that? And what did you hear when they spoke? So when they told you about what was happening to you, what did you actually hear? And out of that, we started to see these patterns, and the residents started to see these patterns emerging about patients who would say, I'll give you some examples of the patients that they shared. So I saw a lot of swelling, a lot of effusion on this joint. I saw limited motion, as they were just not using it. So that as they came in, they didn't want to use it. They were, overcompensating. And there was a lot of effusion. What I felt, I put my hands on that joint and they just locked down. That's what I felt. I felt this lockdown. You just couldn't get them to let you feel the motion, feel the movement. And what did you hear them say? Last time I had surgery, they messed it up. And I had this service afterwards and it didn't work well. And it made my condition worse. I don't want to be here. I don't want you to touch it. You've got to leave it alone. So this is where that notion of what you see, what you feel, and what you hear, reticence to move. If we go ahead and start trying the physical approach that we would with everyone, or what the literature says, and we don't deal with the fear and anxiety the person has because they had a bad experience previously, if we don't work on building trust, if we don't work carefully on kind of getting permission to touch, to move, maybe taking hands off a bit more, having a more hands-off approach where they can actually start to do a lot more themselves. Well, if you just hold it here, if you just shifting the way that we engage, if we don't address that, we'll probably end up with the same resistance and not a good outcome. Other cases, there were students who we saw a pattern for veterans. So veterans would not give you low pain scores when everything that you saw was about high pain scores. All your physical indicators, your touch indicators, everything else was telling you this person's in a lot of distress. But no, stoicism, veteran stoicism, we know a lot about. That stoic attitude came out. I can't complain about this. I can't you have to tuck it down. That's kind of in the culture of the military, particularly the army. You have to stuff it down. So how do you get over that to actually help people think about what kind of pain levels should they be enduring with and what should they not? How can we help to actually get indicators of outcome and indicators of pain level and function and things that aren't totally shaded by that stoicism, but allow some opportunity for people to share it in more detail. So that's kind of the way that thinking about, but you could take anything. You could bring to the table, these are 4 or 5 people, different people that we're working with who have stroke within the rehab facility. And what do we see? What do we feel? What do we hear? That's actually guiding us. And the feel part could be, if you're not hands-on professional, it could be an emotional. That could both be with your hands and with your heart. What do you feel about what's happening with this person? This kind of a structure allows you to be very explicit in thinking about pattern generation and pattern recognition when you are an expert, thinking about your thinking, that metacognitive approach, to know exactly why you're starting to see these patterns. So it allows us to be really explicit and starting to identify them. You have many, many experts at the Rehab Hospital of Indiana. So you have a wealth of opportunity to do these types of conversations about pulling together what that clinical expertise actually looks like. And then how do we fit that? So you'll see in the end, when you're talking about what do you hear? What do you hear when people speak? That's part of the way in which you get to the unique perspectives of people and populations, the unique perspectives, the unique values, and very much the lived experience. So many of us in rehab absolutely abhor the word non-compliant. Non-compliant is just, you're not doing what I told you. We know that many people don't do what we tell them, because there's many other things going on in their heads, and maybe what we tell them isn't the right thing for them. So this part of really understanding the unique perspectives and values of patients is actually about really thinking deeply about those values, getting to the heart of a person's lived experience. And I'm going to give you an example of one way that's rehab focused, of kind of really thinking about that unique presentation. But the what do you hear part can really guide you there. So really making it unique to the person's perspectives and values is about tailoring. It's about tailoring the evidence, the clinical expertise, and then tailoring it to the exact situation, that lived experience of the person. So if they don't have the resources to do what you advise, if they don't have the social support network to do what you advise, if they don't have transportation to get to what you advise, they don't have the strength and capacity, they're fatigued. I worked in a rapid response rehab team for people out of hospital, and we were actually put together as an interprofessional team because patients were going home and getting exhausted by all of us arriving in the first 2 days. When they get home, they're already fatigued because they've had a stroke. This was post-stroke. They're already fatigued. They have low capacity. We all dive in as individual professions. They and their family answer the same questions, maybe 7 times from 7 different professionals who come to the house. And we were actually causing such significant fatigue for people that we believed it was affecting readmission rates. So we shifted to an interprofessional team with one team member going out, whoever we thought was the most important profession at that time. We planned it before the person went home. The most important profession went to the home and actually did the intake for everyone of all that basic information and brought it back, and we built a team plan of how to care for the person. And surprisingly, though not unsurprising to us, the readmission rate started to go down. So things like that, where you think about tailoring to the individual, what is their actual circumstance, and how can what we do have to be modified to actually and tailored for that individual. So that's a really important piece. And I wanted to mention a really easy example of this that's very rehab set. The Locus of Control is something that personally I've used to really shape and change the way that I use evidence and clinical expertise with different patients. And so Locus of Control is all about, if you look at the little highlighted piece, that bold piece of the minute, it's a concept that's about how people believe that rewards better outcomes from rehab or is a reward they receive can be controlled by their own personal actions or someone else's. So for rehab professionals, this relates to how much someone believes that their capacity for recovery is internal to them. These are the patients that constantly work at it to the degree that you're telling them they have to slow down and stop. It's not safe that you keep trying to stand up. Please don't try to put your clothes on your own. All of these things that kind of we get called because people were worried, you know, in nursing, you're worried for the fall risk for people who are doing too much. I started to work many years ago on the notion that this notion of locus of control should shift the way that I engage with people. So you can measure locus of control. And those patients, I find that those patients who were, you know, are fall risks, are dangerous because they were trying to do too much, were people who had a high internal locus of control. They believed it's down to them. And those who were hungry for rehab, you need to give me more, I need more time, I need more sessions, I need more. Those individuals had a strong external locus of control. So to them, the path to recovery was us and what we did to them. For the others, recovery was what they did themselves. That should shift the way that we engage in major ways with people, not telling people not to when they have a strong internal locus of control, but working really hard to show them how to. And for people who have a strong external locus of control, working with them to come from, it's all about what you do to me, more towards it's what we do together. So you have a role in this. Motor relearning, we know 1,000 repetitions. There's no way in our encounters with someone we could do on one task, because it's task specific, 1,000 repetitions. So it has to be you and me together. You have to be working at this when I'm not here. Here's ways that you can do it. Maybe we could use family members or your grandkids or someone else to help you with these things. So you're not on your own. There's someone actually assisting. So that's just one example of how thinking differently about people, about that unique perspectives and values of individuals might shift the way you implement evidence and your clinical expertise. Okay, so I'm hoping I've given you a lot of food for thought, and we're open to questions, ideas, comments, but please just take it as a message to say, just start to really think about it, about how these three things fit.
If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I'll make sure that Dr. Maxwell receives these. No questions yet, but I do want to say that shift of thinking about locus of control was very interesting thought, and I do look forward to, I took a screenshot of that article, so I do want to look it up.
There was a lovely article in about, when was it? 2018, that was about rethinking locus of control by Galvin and et al. And they really did a good, they're thinking about the way it's been used over time. It started in 1954, but it's been used over time in different ways, sometimes tied to other concepts. And they put out an article saying that we should start to think of it on its own again and not with other concepts. But that's a nice kind of one. It's a very up-to-date way of kind of seeing the latest evidence and information. There's also a lovely article from 2017 that's all about how your locus of control shapes your use of healthcare services, your outcomes, in general for your health and well-being. So people with an internal locus of control are healthier than people with an external, and people not necessarily with service use for prevention doesn't really seem to affect prevention, you know, engagement with healthcare, but healthcare in itself, better outcomes for people with an internal locus of control. We can't kind of shift that locus of control, but maybe we can do something about the way we interact with them that can make them more successful.
There are no questions, but a lot of thoughts or appreciative thoughts and comments. Dawn says, I am hopeful this presentation will generate lots of discussion once people have had a chance to fully digest it.
Yeah, and that is my intent. So Dawn, I'm really, really glad to hear you say that, because what would be a really good step is to just have a conversation with a colleague about their clinical expertise and the patterns they see, or think about the people you're treating right now and what's unique about them that you might shift what you do as a clinician that could change the way that you respond with the evidence still behind. But I'd love to think that you're leaving with the sense that the EBP is not about the evidence. It's about a judicious combination.
Thank you, Dr. Maxwell, for your time and your information, education, and expertise. Everyone, there is a reflection raffle option that the link has been entered in the chat box, so make sure that you check that out. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today.